Welcome back to another episode of The Football Chemist, where we use data to go through football's biggest talking points without boring or confusing you with all of that technical jargon. Today, we'll be discussing the transfer rumours swirling around Manchester City, most notably their midfield targets. The main target has been AC Milan midfielder Tijjani Reijnders, but Pep Guardiola's side has also been linked with Bruges' Ardon Jashari and Lyon wonderkid Rayan Cherki. So who are these players? How can they impact City's midfield? And are they the signings Guardiola needs to take back that Premier League title? Let's get into it. So first things first, why do City need midfielders? Well, right now they're in a period of transition, not helped by Kevin de Bruyne leaving this summer on a free transfer. Not only is de Bruyne leaving, but a lot of their midfielders are getting older too. 4 of their 5 midfielders who played over 1,000 minutes last season were aged 29 or older. And when we look at their midfield options going into next season, we can see this age problem more clearly. Only really Nico Gonzalez and Phil Foden are properly young players who have got years ahead of them. And Foden tends to play further forward. And Gonzalez is a new signing, quite unproven for now, and we'll have to see how he gets on. Furthermore, Rodri's ACL injury last season really exposed City's vulnerabilities in this area, and whilst they did sign Gonzalez in January, which has mitigated this to an extent, it's still an area of concern should Rodri get another injury, or if they need to rotate him for whatever reason. And finally, not only are City's midfielders getting older, but they're also getting less effective. And as you can see here, De Bruyne and Bernardo Silva's attacking contributions have really dropped off over the last season. And whilst Kovacic's numbers have increased, he's never really been that kind of midfielder who gets you a lot of direct goals and assists throughout a season. So as I mentioned at the start of the video, there are 3 main midfielders who City are linked with right now. And let's start with the biggest one who will probably cost the most, Tjani Reijnders. So who is Tijjani Reijnders? Tjani Reijnders is a 26-year-old Dutch midfielder who plays for AC Milan. He came through AZ Alkmaar's academy before signing for Milan in 2023. This season he enjoyed a breakthrough year, winning Serie A's Midfielder of the Year, and he also scored 10 goals and 5 assists. He's definitely a more attacking number 8, as you can see from these stats here, where you can see he gets a lot of shots, a lot of goals, and he brings the ball forward as well. And because of this, City have made Reijnders their number 1 midfield priority and have recently submitted a bid worth around £50 million to AC Milan to open negotiations. So as I mentioned before, Reijnders is more attacking as a number 8, and he likes to bring the ball forward, be it through his passes or through his carries. And when we take a look at this graph here, we can see that he is really one of the best in Serie A for this. Because when you compare his passes into the penalty area to the carries into the penalty area, the 2 main ways of getting the ball into the box to create chances, you can see he is well clear of anyone else in the league. And while you might say that this is due to Serie A being perhaps a weaker league than the Premier League, there's still some names on this graph who are top players who have earned a lot of praise this season. For example, look at Scott McTominay down there, who has garnered a lot of praise from the Premier League and from Serie A for his attacking contributions. But Reijnders is well clear of anyone else here. And so if Guardiola were to sign him, he would surely be that kind of mould where he'd be a Kevin de Bruyne replacement, rather than trying to replace any of their current midfielders. Because when we compare his polygons side by side with De Bruyne, we can see the similarities straight away. Now, no one's really going to be able to match De Bruyne for his progressive play or his chance creation, because he has been one of the best players in the world at this over the last decade. But Reijnders' numbers show that he can perhaps hold his own in this metric against De Bruyne should he sign for City. And as we can see here, they're very similar players where their progressive play is great, but their numbers for tackles, blocks and interceptions are a bit so-so. But that's not an issue for players like Reijnders and De Bruyne because they'll be part of a midfield unit and they're not in there to do the tackling. Although, having said that, Reijnders' interceptions is very impressive, and this will be important if they want to win the ball high up the pitch. So it's always a useful thing to have. And at 26, whilst he's not the youngest player in the world, he still adds some youth to that midfield, and he's got 5, 6, 7 years ahead of him. So he's definitely not just a short-term signing. But when we compare him to City's other midfielders right now, we can see a bit of a problem emerging. Because when we look at their polygons side by side, we can see that him, Bernardo Silva and Ilkay Gundogan are all very similar players where they excel with their progressive play. They're some of the best in the league for it, but the defensive numbers are a bit so-so. And whilst it's fine for this to be the case for one midfielder, to have it with 2 or 3 is a bit of an issue. This pattern here could overload Rodri, and whilst Rodri is world-class at what he does, it might still be too much for him. Because City have been linked with another midfielder who I made a video on in the past, Hugo Larsson, and one could argue that Larsson would be a more suitable signing than Reijnders because he's more rounded and better at these tackles, blocks and interceptions than Reijnders is. But if you want to find out more about Larsson, check out my previous video. However, all in all, it is clear that Reijnders is a high-quality midfielder who would be an upgrade on either Gundogan or Bernardo Silva, who are both getting older. And so out of the 3, I think Reijnders is the most high-priority signing, and City should be aggressive in the market and make sure that they do actually sign him on and not just have him as their number 1 target. He should be their number 1 signing. So who else do City have their eye on? Well, one such player is Club Brugge's Ardon Jashari. Now, compared to Reijnders, Jashari is a much bigger unknown who's younger and has a lot more untapped potential though, and so could be moulded into Pep Guardiola's side. But who is he? Ardon Jashari is a 22-year-old Swiss midfielder who plays for Club Brugge. He came through FC Luzern's academy before signing for Bruges last year for a club record sale of €6 million. Now, I know what you're thinking. Who are Luzern and why is it significant that he's their club record sale? But they have had some notable players such as Max Meyer, Stefan Lichtsteiner and Remo Freuler. Some other players who I didn't include on this graphic, Holger Badstuber and Samad Yessel, and that's a niche one. But anyway, back to Jashari. He is a more traditional number 6. So if City were to sign in, he would be cover for Rodri and maybe even a long-term replacement. In terms of his stats, he's big on chance creation, and we can see this by the way he carries the ball forward. For a number 6, these numbers are really impressive, even if he is compared to Europe's next 14 leagues rather than Europe's top 5 leagues, because he plays most of his football for Club Brugge. And whilst he does have a few numbers that we can compare from his Champions League experience, this isn't very relative to how he'd be playing at City, because when he plays for Brugge in the Champions League, he's playing for a smaller club, whereas when he's playing in the Pro League, he's playing for a bigger club. But either way, his ball carrying ability is very impressive, and it looks like he could provide great cover for Rodri should something happen to him again this season. Because when we look at their polygons side by side, you can kind of see how they are similar, where both players do excel in their progressive play, and for a number 6 in a big team, this is so important because it's less about defending because you're seeing more of the ball. It's more about that pass distribution or getting the ball forward just by carrying it forward, really. And as you can see here, Jashari and Rodri are both very good with their progressive play. And something that Jashari has the edge on Rodri on is his discipline. Makes very few errors, very few fouls, very few yellow cards as well. This is very useful. But as I mentioned before, City have already signed someone to cover for Rodri in Nico Gonzalez. So is Jashari an upgrade on Gonzalez? When we look at their polygons, it does appear he is. But these numbers for Gonzalez are a bit skewed because he hasn't played that much for City this season, so he hasn't really had a chance to impress and really build his numbers up. So let's take this with a pinch of salt. But given that City have already signed Gonzalez, and they've also got players like Rico Lewis who can drop into midfield if they're really needed to, I would say that signing someone like Jashari is not necessarily the signing that City need to make this summer. He would be a good addition, but I think he should be much lower priority on their list of signings. And finally, a more attacking player who City have been linked with recently is Rayan Cherki. Now, Rayan Cherki will be a more familiar name to Premier League fans, especially those who have been following the Europa League this season. But who is he? Rayan Cherki is a 21-year-old French attacking midfielder who plays for Lyon. He came through their academy, but he could also be available for as little as £20 million this summer. Last season, he bagged a league-high 11 assists, but most notably, he scored twice against Man United in the Europa League quarter-final. Quite frankly, Cherki is one of the best passers in Europe, especially on the back of last season, because when we look at some of his key stats at a glance, you can see that he's in the 99th percentile for so many important stats. I've listed 4 of them here, but he's also in the 99th percentile for expected assists, key passes, and shot-creating actions. It is amazing how good his passes are, and how varied his range of passes and his ways of creating chances are. This would be so useful for a team like City. But I think if they were to sign him, he won't be playing in that midfield. If anything, he'd be playing in that front 3. I think he'd almost be cover or competition for Foden, who misfired a bit last season. And so having someone like Cherki in your squad, whether he starts or he comes off the bench, is a great way for City to mix things up in a game where it is tight and they're not creating chances. It's like having another tool on your Swiss Army knife, really. You don't necessarily need it all the time, but boy, is it useful when you do need it. And therefore, I think signing someone like Cherki is not essential, but it would be quite nice. And at £20 million, he would be a bargain. So 3 midfielders here, 3 potential signings. What are City going to do? Well, judging by the noise, it looks like they are making Reijnders a very, very high priority. And I'd be surprised if that signing doesn't come through. As for the other 2 midfielders, I think Jashari is an unlikely signing. And me personally, I think they should go for someone like Hugo Larsson, who might be a bit more expensive, but I think is overall a better player and brings much needed balance for the midfield. When you're looking at the profiles at a glance, you might have noticed that the 5 worst statistics for all of these players were very similar statistics. And so City do need to have someone a bit different in that midfield just to break things up, really. As for Cherki, I think he's a fantastic player. He's still very young. He's demonstrated so much potential and his ceiling could be very high. And if City can get him for 20, 25 million, I think they should go for it. He may not be the player who they need this season, but he is definitely great for their long-term plans. And City can afford to get 2 or 3 midfielders as well. They haven't actually spent that big before this January transfer window, and so they do have the cash and will not need to worry about PSR as much as some of their rivals might. They already bolstered their defence recently, and signing Omar Marmoush in January was a good way of replacing Julian Alvarez, who left in the summer. But whilst they do need to invest in midfielders, they also need to invest in wingers. Cherki can play there if they do sign him, but they do have a growing problem there. When you consider that Grealish looks to be leaving, Foden's out of form, and Doku and Savinho have never really kicked on in the way that Guardiola would have expected. But what do you think? How do City bolster their midfield this summer? Are these the signings that could take them to another Premier League title? Let me know what you think in the comments below and give this video a like if you like what you've seen. Also, feel free to subscribe if you want to see more content like this. After a 3-week hiatus, I'm now hopefully back to producing regular videos, so it'd be great to see this channel grow over the next few months. Also, give us a follow on Instagram and TikTok if you want to see some more short form and behind the scenes content. I'll see you next time.